You'd think a woman her age would at least know English. Victor Brandt's voice sliced through the quiet of the restaurant like a butter knife through overcooked steak. He didn't bother to lower his tone. He never did. His words bounced off the polished marble floors of the upscale bistro tucked inside Leighton Capital's Manhattan Tower, where candlelight met stainless steel, and conversations always cost more than the entree. Across the table, Aurora Leighton's fork paused mid-air. A hush fell. Not because Victor had said something shocking everyone at Leighton was used to his disdain, but because of who it was directed at. The woman stood just inside the entrance, wrapped in a long golden scarf, her hands trembling as she clutched a weathered purse. Her lips moved rapidly, her voice layered with panic and a thick Arabic accent. The maître blinked completely lost. "She's asking for help," Aurora said quietly, watching the woman's eyes dart from face to face, desperate for understanding. "She's lost." "Yeah. Well, she's also lost her mind. If she thinks this is the Guggenheim," Victor snorted. He pushed back his chair with a theatrical sigh. "Let a man of culture handle this." Aurora's fingers tightened around her wine glass. Victor swaggered over, puffing out his chest like a man who had once vacationed in Cairo and thought that made him fluent. "Bonjour, madame," he said, drawing out each syllable like a cartoon villain. "You want sit, you tourist?" He gestured at the nearest table with both hands like he was hosting a game show. The woman flinched. Her voice rose a flurry of words Aurora couldn't understand but felt. In her chest lost desperate, utterly alone. "Seriously?" a voice murmured behind her. "This is painful." Aurora turned her head. The janitor? He had been cleaning quietly near the back of the restaurant, unnoticed, like janitors always were. Mid-40s, maybe broad shoulders, graying at the temple's uniform, creased but clean. A name tag read, Graham. He set his mop aside and walked straight toward the woman. Aurora almost called out, "What was he doing?" But then he knelt slightly, made gentle eye contact, and spoke. Not in English, not in awkward tourist French. He spoke in Arabic, fluent, warm, clear. The woman gasped. Her hand flew to her mouth, tears springing to her eyes. She replied in rapid-fire Arabic, her body trembling with relief. Graham nodded, listening carefully, his voice low, reassuring. He gently took the brochure from her hands, pulled a pen from his pocket and wrote something on the back directions, maybe. Then he guided her to a chair, got her a glass of water, and waved over the teenage hostess. No fuss, no spotlight, no need for applause. He turned, picked up his mop, and walked back toward the hallway as if nothing had happened. The silence in the restaurant was deafening. Victor stood frozen, looking like he'd just swallowed a lemon, whole. He opened his mouth to say something witty. Nothing came out. Aurora rose slowly. Her eyes followed Graham as he disappeared around the corner. "I'll be right back," she said, setting down her napkin. Victor barely noticed. His ego was hemorrhaging. She caught up to Graham outside the kitchen. "You speak Arabic," she said. He didn't stop moving, just nodded, among other things. "Where did you learn it?" He glanced at her. "University of Beirut Linguistics Department. I taught there for almost a decade." That stopped her cold. "You were a professor." "Still am?" He said, "In the same way a piano with broken strings is still a piano." Aurora searched his face. It was calm, unreadable, but there was something behind his eyes, a weight. He picked up a bucket and kept walking. "Why are you mopping floors in a tower full of millionaires?" she asked. He stopped then, looked over his shoulder. "Because my daughter can't start her day without hearing the same lullaby her mother used to sing," he said, "and this job lets me be home in the mornings." He disappeared into the service hallway. Aurora stood there, heart thudding. Unsure whether she had just witnessed something magical or terribly sad, or both, She returned to the table in a daze. Victor raised an eyebrow. You okay? That guy's clearly got some complex about being invisible. Aurora looked at him, really looked, and for the first time in their 5 years of working together, she realized how loud and shallow and colorless his world truly was. She picked up her purse. We're done here, she said. Victor blinked. Done eating? No, Victor, she said softly. Done pretending your voice is the one I need to hear. She left him sitting there, dumbfounded, the check untouched between them. Abby, the janitor cart was gone, but the golden scarf still hung on the back of a chair, forgotten, fluttering, slightly in the draft from the glass doors. Aurora reached out and touched it just for a moment. The fabric was soft, frayed at the edges. It smelled faintly of rose water. A woman had walked into a restaurant tonight and found her way. Aurora wasn't sure why, but she had a feeling so had she. Ellis Aurora said softly, tapping the edge of her tablet as the search results loaded. Graham Ellis. It was past midnight, but her penthouse apartment pulsed with city light. The skyline shimmered beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows, untouched wine glass on the counter, high heels discarded like fallen soldiers near the door. And Aurora, still in her blazer hair, pulled back like armor, hunched over her screen like a detective chasing a ghost. And she was right to, because Graham Ellis wasn't just a janitor. He'd once been Dr. Graham Ellis, Ph.D. in Comparative Linguistics, University of Chicago, former lecturer at the American University of Beirut, published, respected, vanished from academia in 2017. The trail just stopped. No scandal, no obituary, no retirement notice, just silence. Aurora leaned back, staring at the screen. The man who mopped her company's floors had once given TEDx talks on language preservation. She found a faded photo him standing on a podium, sleeves rolled, smiling hand mid-gesture. The man in that picture had light behind his eyes. The man at her building had dust in his footsteps, and she couldn't stop asking why. The next morning she called for him, not summoned, not barked. She simply asked the front desk if Mr. Ellis was available for a few minutes. It felt wrong calling him the janitor now. He arrived 10 minutes later, clean uniform sleeves rolled, expression neutral. Ma'am, he said, courteous, controlled. You can call me Aurora, I'd rather not. She almost smiled. I looked you up, she said plainly. Last night, I figured. His gaze didn't flinch. You were a brilliant academic. Still am, just not paid for it. You walked away from it. No. He said life walked away from me. I just stopped trying to chase it. She studied him. The calm wasn't indifference. It was survival. I want to ask you something, she said, and I want you to say no if you feel it, but not out of reflex, out of truth. That got his attention. I'm negotiating an acquisition, she continued. A school, Dar Al-Fan, an art institute in Morocco. The family that owns it doesn't trust outsiders. They don't respond to pressure or money. My entire legal team has failed. But yesterday her voice drifted. I mopped up a mess. You bridged a world, she corrected. You made someone feel seen. That's rarer than any resume. He exhaled slowly, the first sign of emotion cracking through. And you think I can help you buy a school? He asked. I think you can help me speak to someone who doesn't want to be sold anything. Graham said nothing for a long while. Then why me? I don't know yet, Aurora said honestly. But I know what I felt in that moment, and I trusted more than spreadsheets. He shook his head lightly. You don't need a translator, Miss Layton. You need someone who understands what can't be translated. That's exactly why I came to you. He looked away for a beat, his jaw tightening. Then quietly, my daughter Amira. She has sensory processing disorder. Crowds are hard. Change is harder. I take this job because it lets me be there for her every morning. I cook her breakfast. I help her regulate. I walk her to school. I don't compromise that. Aurora's voice softened. Then bring her. Graham blinked. To Morocco, he said, half laughing, half disbelieving. She's part of your world, Aurora said. And if I want you to help me cross into someone else's, I have to meet yours where it stands. He didn't speak. Think about it, she added. I'll send you the brief. If your answer's no, it'll stay between us. She started to turn. Miss Layton. She turned back. Graham's voice was low, but it carried more weight than anything she'd heard all year. Thank you for seeing me. That night, Graham stood at the kitchen counter of his small one-bedroom apartment in Queens, slicing strawberries into quarters. The walls were chipped. The sink dripped. The radio played soft jazz that barely masked the hum of the refrigerator. Amamira sat at the table, barefoot legs tucked beneath her, lining up her beads by color green to yellow to blue to clear. She wore noise-canceling headphones, her auburn curls spilling out the sides. Graham placed the fruit in front of her. Mercy, Baba, she said automatically, eyes still fixed on the beads. His breath caught. It wasn't the French. It was that she'd used a full sentence. Up-rompted, smooth, no hesitation. He crouched beside her. Would you like to hear a story? He asked. She nodded without looking up. So he told her about the city of Marrakesh, about colors that danced in the air and spices that spoke in whispers and tiles that told stories without needing words. He told her about a school where painters painted with sunlight and sculptors, carved from memory. And he told her about a woman sharp and strong who built empires but had never walked through a souk. When he finished, Amir reached into her bead pile and held up one, the golden one. For the lady, she said. He blinked. Which lady? The one who doesn't smile yet, she said simply. Graham sat down slowly. His daughter, the child who barely spoke, who flinched from strangers who communicated in color and silence, had seen more than most adults. She had heard what Aurora Layton didn't say. The next morning, Graham walked into Aurora's office holding two things, a folder and a golden bead on a string. I read the brief, he said. Aurora looked up from her laptop. She seemed surprised to see him so soon. And I'll go. You're sure I'm not? He smiled faintly. But that doesn't matter. He set the bead on her desk. She said it's for the lady who doesn't smile yet. Aurora stared at it for a moment. Then, without thinking, she picked it up and slipped it into her blazer pocket. She didn't speak, but she smiled. It started with a hum, soft, barely audible, like a tune remembered not by melody but by feeling. Graham was standing at the stovetop in their modest Airbnb apartment just off a side street in Marrakesh. Eggs sizzling in the pan, the aroma of cumin and coriander drifting gently into the sun-drenched room. Amamira sat curled up at the small kitchen table, knees to chest, arms wrapped tight around her stuffed giraffe. Her headphones were off, but her fingers were twitching, searching for rhythm, something steady in this unfamiliar world. He kept humming, a lullaby from his wife's village, one she used to sing during thunderstorms. It meant nothing and everything, no lyrics, just the soul of a woman who used music to hold her daughter when words failed. That morning, it reached, air differently. Baba, she whispered. He turned. She was rocking gently back and forth, eyes still on the table, but her lips moved. She hummed it back. One note, then another. And then, soft, breathy trembling, she whispered a phrase in Arabic. Same as Mama, she said. Graham froze. Not because it shocked him, but because it didn't. Because some things are etched into the bones, waiting for the right note to awaken them. Later that morning, Aurora met them in the garden of the Institute, a quiet courtyard surrounded by high clay walls and lemon trees. She wore loose linen sunglasses perched atop her head, but no amount of designer restraint could hide the fatigue in her shoulders. Is she okay with this? She asked, nodding toward Amir, who sat cross-legged on the stone bench, quietly stringing together her beads. Graham followed her gaze. We don't do okay. We do moments, and this one's a good one. Aurora nodded slowly. She's beautiful, she murmured. She's my compass, he said, the only thing that kept me from folding in on myself. Aurora glanced at him. And what would have happened if you had? I wouldn't be here, he replied simply. Neither would she. They sat in silence for a beat. Then Aurora leaned in, tone shifting. There's a formal dinner tonight with the Alpha family. Not business, just an invitation to observe. Be polite. Smile. Don't push anything. Graham smirked. I wasn't planning on pitching a PowerPoint. You'd be amazed how many American executives can't help themselves. Maybe it's time we try listening instead. Aurora tilted her head. Is that how you talk to your students? I haven't had a classroom in 6 years. You still sound like a man who does. Graham met her eyes. That's because some things don't stop being true just because you're not paid for them. The dinner was held in an arched courtyard, filled with flickering lanterns and long embroidered cushions. Dishes of lamb tagine and mint tea lined the table. Jasmine hung heavy in the air. Aurora sat at the far end beside Yasmina Alpha, the family matriarch. Graceful, elegant, and regal in a way that wasn't rehearsed, but inherited. She didn't speak often, but when she did, the table hushed. Her silver bangles chimed softly like punctuation. Graham was seated further down, across from a teenage boy from the family, who introduced himself shyly in French. They began speaking first in French, then slipping into Arabic. Soon they were laughing softly, exchanging jokes about idioms and tongue twisters. Aurora noticed. So did Yasmina. You brought an academic, the matriarch said, lifting her tea slowly. Not a lawyer. Aurora smiled. I brought someone who speaks more than just business. Yasmina's eyes twinkled. And you? Do you speak that language too? I'm trying to. Aurora said. It's harder than I thought. Only if you try to speak it. With your head. Aurora looked at her. And if I use something else, Yasmina sipped, then you'll stop trying to translate and start understanding. After dinner, as the sky turned indigo, Graham crouched beside a mirror, who had stayed close to the edges of the courtyard all night. She was now kneeling under the table, her beads scattered across the rug like a galaxy. She whispered something. Aurora leaned in, unable to hear. She's naming the colors, Graham murmured in Arabic. Aurora's breath caught. She's not just copying, he said. She remembers. Yasmina approached, then gliding more than walking. She knelt slowly, carefully, so her eyes were level with the mirrors. She reached into her robe and pulled out a small, aged tile, blue with white calligraphy. Do you know what this says? She asked softly. Amamira looked up, hesitant. Graham nodded, gently. Go ahead. Amira leaned closer. Her lips formed the word slowly, deliberately. Salam. Peace. Yasmina placed the tile in the girl's hand. Aurora stood frozen, watching something ancient and sacred unfold in real time. Then Yasmina looked up at Graham. That word she said is not just for her. Graham blinked. You carry too much, Yasmina said. Men like you. Forget you don't have to. His voice was soft. I don't know how to set it down. Then start, she said by letting someone else carry it with you. Her eyes flicked toward Aurora. The CEO shifted, and for the first time in years, she didn't feel insulted by being seen. She felt relieved. That night, back at the apartment, Graham watched Amira sleep arms around her stuffed giraffe, the blue tile still clutched in her palm. Aurora stood in the doorway. She said a full sentence tonight, she whispered. Graham nodded. 3 words, and every one of them mattered. He looked over his shoulder. She's opening. Aurora folded her arms. You know, I've closed myself off from people for years. Even the ones I hired, I kept at arm's length. I told myself it was strength. It was control. He turned fully to her. And now she hesitated. It just feels lonely. Graham held her gaze, then said gently, It's not too late to rewrite the story. Aurora smiled faintly. Funny coming from a janitor. He smiled back. I stopped being that the moment someone called me by my name. She stepped into the room, and the silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of possibility. Tell me, said the voice, soft but unmistakably sharp. What makes you think I'd entrust our legacy to someone who speaks Arabic with an American mouth? The question didn't come with malice. It came with centuries of expectation. Madame Yasmina Alfs sat upright in her leather armchair, an heirloom, in itself beneath the carved cedar dome of her private salon. The air smelled faintly of orange blossom and thyme. Around her, the walls of the ancient riad whispered with the quiet elegance of a family who'd never sold their soul for scale. Across from her, Graham Ellis didn't blink. I don't want your legacy, he replied. I want to understand it. Yasmina narrowed her eyes. You think that's enough? No, he said, but it's where most people fail to start. There was a pause, the kind of pause that makes or breaks everything. Then a breath barely audible. You may speak. The official meeting between the Alpha family and Leighton Capital was by all metrics a slow-burn disaster. Aurora sat flanked by 3 corporate advisors flown in from London armed with graphs and carefully memorized case studies. They spoke in the crisp clinical dialect of Western capitalism, expansion, equity, global positioning. But the words bounced off the tiled walls like stray bullets. Yasmina's sons, Kareem and Idris, answered every point with polite stonewalling, their smiles tight, their silence louder than any objection. Graham, seated at the far end, said nothing. He only watched. He noted the way Yasmina's fingers brushed. A book beside her, the only object on the table untouched by tea or papers. A worn leather volume, its corners soft from decades of reverent use. Arabic calligraphy on the spine, a family history, no doubt. He noticed her expression whenever someone mispronounced the name of her grandfather's technique, Kat al-Mela, an ancient stitching method exclusive to the Dar Allen workshops. Each time her jaw tightened just slightly like a violin string about to snap. He watched the youngest granddaughter sneak in during the meeting barefoot and curious, only to be ushered away with a gentle nod. He saw everything and said nothing until it mattered. That evening, Aurora paced in her temporary office like a storm trapped in a bottle. The sun was melting into the terracotta skyline outside. They didn't listen to a single thing, she said. Voice taut. Kareem just nodded through the entire presentation like we were speaking to a ghost. You were, Graham replied, leaning against the archway. Aurora stopped. Excuse me? You were talking to the ghost of every outsider who ever tried to tell them who they should become. You don't get to save something you don't even respect. She blinked. Are you saying I don't respect them? I'm saying you respected the deal, not the story behind it. Aurora sat heavily into the velvet chair behind the desk. I came here to help them preserve their brand, she said. I'm not here to bulldoze a museum. No, Graham agreed. You came to protect something beautiful, but beauty doesn't exist in spreadsheets. She looked up at him. Then where does it live? He didn't hesitate. In memory, in grief, in names written by hand. You don't gain someone's trust by offering to multiply what they love. You earn it by kneeling down beside them and saying, Tell me what you lost. Aurora stared at him. That's how you talk to people. It's how I used to, he said, before I decided it was safer to stop speaking. The next morning, Graham requested a private audience with Yasmina. No lawyers, no interpreters, no agenda. He was shown into a sunroom where the matriarch sat surrounded by clippings and sketchbooks from another time. Her hands moved slowly through a bundle of silk threads, fingers as precise as a calligrapher's. "You are braver than the rest," she said without looking up. "Or more foolish." Graham smiled. "Both tend to come in the same package." She glanced at him. "And what do you want from me? To understand why you said no?" Yasmina tilted her head. "Most men try to persuade," she said. "You're here to ask why?" They failed. "I'm here," Graham said, "because I think you're not protecting a company. You're guarding a graveyard." Silence, deep, heavy. "You buried something," he said gently. "And every person who walks through those gates reminds you of what can't be brought back." Her eyes glistened, but she didn't flinch. "Tell me what it was," he said. Yasmina slowly reached for the book beside her. She opened it to a page yellowed with time, a photo, black and white. A woman with wide eyes and a defiant smile standing beside an open leather trunk filled with hand-sewn journals. "My mother, Yasmina," said she wrote the names of every girl who ever studied under her in these pages. Even when they left, even when the government told us we could not accept female apprentices, she said, "Names matter, that if you remember someone's name, they are never truly gone." Graham swallowed. "She died 3 days after I gave birth to my first son," Yasmina continued. "She never saw what this place became." He met her eyes. "And you're afraid it will become something she wouldn't recognize." She nodded once, slowly. "I understand," he said, "because I lost someone too." She waited. "My wife," he said, "Amira's mother. Her name was Layla, and I stopped teaching the day she died. I didn't think my voice belonged in the world without hers in it." Yasmina exhaled deeply. "And now," Graham said, "I speak for my daughter, and for anyone whose name might be forgotten if I don't." Later that night, Aurora found Graham standing, alone in the Riyadh courtyard, moonlight, casting his shadow long across the mosaic floor. She said, "Yes," he told her before she could speak to another meeting. "Just us." Aurora raised an eyebrow. "You negotiated that I didn't negotiate anything," he said. "I just listened." She crossed her arms, eyes searching his. "Do you have any idea how insane this all is?" she said. "You're a janitor. I'm a CEO. We're standing in a 300-year-old house in Morocco trying to save an art school neither of us ever studied in." Graham looked up at the stars. "Sometimes the best way to find your purpose," and he said, "is to stumble into someone else's." She stared at him, the lines around her eyes softer. "Now you're not what I expected." He turned toward her. "No," he said, "but I might be what you needed." Aurora didn't smile, but for the first time she didn't resist the truth. "I don't speak their language," Aurora murmured, standing beside Graham as they watched a dozen street children gather beneath the archways of the Medina. "No," Graham replied, "but maybe your silence can." The courtyard was alive in a way spreadsheets could never be. Laughter echoed off mosaic walls. The scent of spiced tea swirled in the breeze, and the afternoon sun painted every cracked tile with the gold of 1,000 unspoken memories. The children came barefoot, curious. A few held broken pencils. Others dragged torn sketchbooks behind them like wounded wings. Graham had promised Yasmina a demonstration, not a presentation, not a pitch, but a moment, something that couldn't be rehearsed. A beat-up radio played a folk tune, faint and tiny. Graham knelt in the center of the courtyard and reached into a worn canvas bag. Out came a small paintbrush, a plastic bowl of water, and a notebook filled with blank pages. He looked up at the children, then began humming soft, melodic a lullaby. "Shuya," he whispered. "Look, O Layla, the moon waits for you." A boy with wild hair edged closer. Without speaking, Graham dipped the brush into the water and painted the word "Hublove" onto the dry stone floor. The water darkened the tile, a temporary message made of nothing more than liquid and light. The children gasped. Then, one by one, they copied him. Soon, the courtyard became a living poem. Temporary calligraphy scrolled across every stone, dissolving. In real time beneath the Moroccan sun. Aurora stood at the edge, arms crossed over her chest. But her eyes, they betrayed her, wide, shining. She wasn't used to this kind of influence, the kind that asked for nothing and yet changed everything. A small girl tugged her sleeve. She held up a brush. Aurora hesitated. Then she took it. She knelt beside the children, and after a deep breath, began to copy one of the symbols Graham had painted. Not perfectly, not gracefully, but honestly. Yasmina watched from a shaded balcony above her face, unreadable. That night, the air at the riad was warm and still. Graham and Aurora sat alone under a canopy of bougainvillea, a silver teapot between them. "Do you know what I saw today?" Aurora asked. Graham poured the tea without answering. "I saw a man with no title, no leverage, no money, hold an audience better than any executive I've ever met." He smiled faintly. "Children aren't shareholders, they're listeners. You make it sound easy. It's not." He took a sip, "But it's honest." She looked at him, not as a CEO assessing value, but as a woman realizing she might have overlooked something precious. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked. "Teeing?" He nodded slowly. "Every day. Then why not go back?" Graham let out a breath. "Because I lost the person who used to sit in the front row, the one who would listen even when I mumbled. After Ila died, every classroom felt too loud, too hollow." Aurora's voice dropped. "And Amira. She doesn't need me to lecture," he said softly. "She needs me to stay." A pause. "Then I haven't cried in years," Aurora confessed, eyes fixed on the teacup in her hand. "Not since the divorce. I built Leighton Capital brick by brick so I'd never need to ask anyone for anything again." Graham tilted his head. "How's that working? Out?" She let out a broken laugh. "It's lonely at the top and it's cold, like standing on a marble rooftop barefoot and pretending it's a throne." He didn't smile. He didn't pity her. He just said, "I've been mopping those floors for 3 years and not once did I see you look down." She blinked. It wasn't an accusation. It was a mirror. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "For what?" "For not seeing you." Graham looked at her. Really looked. "You see me now," he said. The next morning, a photo went viral. A local street artist had captured the moment, a barefoot girl painting Arabic words with a water-soaked brush while a Western businesswoman kneeled beside her copying the letters like a student. The caption, "Love like language only lives when it is shared." Yasmina called a meeting. Only Graham and Aurora were invited. In her private study, she sat across from them and said simply, "Tell me why I should trust you." Aurora didn't look. At Graham for help, she straightened her spine. "I can't promise to preserve what you've built. I'm not a museum. I don't want to embalm your legacy and put it behind glass." Yasmina raised an eyebrow. "What I want," Aurora continued, "is for your legacy to breathe, to teach, to evolve. I want children from Rabbit and Brooklyn to sit side by side and learn from each other. Not because they have to, but because someone made room." Yasmina leaned back. "Most women come to me with numbers," she said. "You came with a brushstroke." She turned to Graham. "And you, the quiet one, What do you want? He answered without flinching. Nothing, except a place where children like my daughter can speak even if they use their fingers instead of their mouths. Silence. Then Yasmina smiled, her first real smile since their arrival. You may proceed, she said. But understand this. I am not giving you permission. I am giving you a chance. Aurora bowed her head. Graham placed a hand over his heart, and from that moment the contract began, not on paper, but in the shared language of trust. That night, Aurora walked with Graham through the garden. I'm starting to forget you were ever a janitor, she said lightly. He chuckled. I didn't forget. I still see the stains on my hands. They're not stains, she replied. They're stories. He paused. I think, he said slowly, this might be the first time in years I've done something for the world again, not just for survival. She looked up at him, the stars reflected in her eyes. You're not surviving anymore, Graham. He met her gaze. You're building. You ever stand in a room full of applause and feel like you're suffocating. Aurora's voice was barely louder than the rain, tapping against the courtyard glass. Graham looked up from his tea. His hands, still calloused from years of cleaning what others dirtied, rested calmly around the chipped ceramic cup. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he let her words hang in the air, not because he didn't understand, but because he understood too well. They were alone now. The Riyadh's common room was quiet. Outside, Marrakesh had slowed into evening. The lanterns flickered in their iron cages, shadows swaying like memories unspoken. Aurora sat across from him, still dressed in her polished gray blazer, but barefoot. The heels had been kicked off without ceremony the moment she entered. She looked smaller tonight, and not just in stature, in armor. I used to think success would feel like safety, she continued, swirling her glass of mint tea but not drinking. That if I could just climb high enough, own enough buildings, win enough deals, I'd never be vulnerable again. She laughed, but it was hollow. My ex-husband used to say I was more steel than soul, that I didn't cry when I signed our divorce papers, that I didn't cry when I found the emails either. Graham didn't flinch. He'd seen that kind of grief before, the kind that calcified instead of spilled. So, what did you do? He asked gently. I built latent capital, she said. Every wall, every clause, every policy. I built it so airtight even my heart couldn't escape. There was silence again, and then she whispered almost as if confessing to the wind. But I didn't build a door. I forgot how to let anything in. Graham leaned back. His eyes were steady but warm, like a man who had nothing to prove and everything to give if someone would just hold out a hand. I used to mop the floor outside your boardroom, he said. Heard a 100 deals, watched a 100 power plays, but I never once heard anyone say thank you to the guy who reset the chairs. Aurora looked down. I didn't see you, she admitted. Not really. It's all right, he said softly. Most people don't. She finally sipped the tea. It was sweet and strong, a little like him. Can I ask you something? She said. Of course. Why didn't you ever try to go back to teaching, to academia, to the life you left? Graham tilted his head, thinking. I did try, he said. Twice. Once right, after Illa died. Once when Amira was diagnosed and he exhaled. The world moves fast. Too fast for a man who needs mornings to braid his daughter's hair. Too fast for a man who needs to translate the world into something soft enough for her to touch. He paused. I don't need a title. I need time. Time to watch her draw letters in the sand. Time to notice when her socks itch and her eyes go cloudy. Aurora's eyes misted. And then, finally, the dam broke. She didn't sob. She didn't fall apart. She simply cried. One tear, then another. Slow, honest, like rain over dry earth. "I haven't done this in years," she whispered. "I know," Graham said. She looked up, startled. "How?" He smiled, a small, sad, beautiful smile. "Because I've been holding mine just as long." They sat like that for a long while, two people who had nothing left to perform, nothing left to hide, just a janitor, just a CEO, and between them, not silence, but safety. Later that night, Aurora walked alone through the Riyadh garden. She found a mirror sitting by the lily pond, tracing her fingers along the rim of a ceramic bowl. The girl didn't look up, but she didn't flinch at Aurora's presence either. That she'd come to learn was Amamira's version of permission. Aurora knelt beside her and took a slow breath. "Hi, sweetheart." Amamira said nothing, so Aurora tried something else. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a bracelet made of small wooden beads, the kind therapists sometimes used for kids with sensory sensitivities. "I saw this at the market," she said. "The colors reminded me of the water drawings your dad taught the kids yesterday." Amamira paused, her fingers stilled. Then, without speaking, she took the bracelet and slid it onto her wrist. Aurora didn't cry this time. She smiled. Not for herself, but for the quiet bridge that had just been built, one bead, one breath, one act of kindness at a time. The next morning, Graham found Aurora in the central courtyard barefoot again, watering a potted jasmine plant. "You're up early?" he said. She looked over her shoulder, couldn't sleep. He watched her gently tilt the clay pot. "You ever think about leaving all this?" she asked suddenly. "This America, the corporate world, the deadlines. What if we just stayed here?" Graham raised an eyebrow. "And do what?" She shrugged. "Open a school, a tea shop, something, anything." He chuckled. "That sounds dangerously close to happiness." Aurora's smile was softer now, less like a mask, more like a sunrise. "Maybe I'm just tired of being impressive," she said. "You've done impressive," Graham replied. "Now try being remembered." She blinked. "That's one of those lines, isn't it? The ones people write down, only if they're paying attention." She stepped closer. So did he. And for a moment, just a moment, the air between them was electric, charged with something unspoken but undeniable. "You know," she said, voice barely above a whisper, "I think I needed a janitor to teach me how to clean up the part of my life I kept sweeping under the rug." Graham leaned in just slightly. "And I think I needed a CEO to remind me that power doesn't always mean control." She smiled. "Sometimes it means surrender." "Surrender," he echoed. "To what?" "To something better." "Than safety," she said. He held her gaze. "To something real. You cannot buy the roots of a tree just because you admire its flowers." The voice came from a woman cloaked in lavender silk, seated beneath a jasmine trellis in the courtyard of Dar Alan. Madame Yasmina Alpha Z, the matriarch of one of Morocco's oldest cultural legacies, did not rise when Aurora approached, not out of disrespect, but out of sovereignty. She didn't need to stand to command a room. Aurora paused at the threshold. No assistant, no translator, no legal team in tow, just her and a trembling breath she refused to let shake her spine. "May I sit?" Aurora asked, voice even. Madame Yasmina gestured to the seat across from her. It was low to the ground, hand-carved from cedar, no cushions, a subtle test of humility. Aurora accepted. The mint tea arrived not in a boardroom pitcher, but in a silver tray carried by a girl no older than a mirror. She poured slowly, deliberately, letting the fragrance rise like incense. Neither woman touched their glass yet. "Mr. Ellis tells me Yasmina began in slow, measured English that you do not wish to buy Dar Alan." Aurora folded her hands. "That's correct. You wish to what partner preserve? Rebrand it with your name above." The gate. Aurora shook her head gently. I want to help it live. Yasmina's brow arched. And you believe it is dying? I believe it's being buried. Aurora replied, under paperwork, fear, and the illusion that tradition can't evolve. The wind rustled the vines overhead. Yasmina studied her. In our world, the matriarch said, tradition is not old cloth to be dyed a new color. It is a sacred thread. You pull at it, and the whole garment unravels. Aurora took her time, then leaned forward slightly, and in mine tradition is only sacred if it still breathes. That stopped Yasmina's hand mid-air. The tea in her cup trembled. She set it down without drinking. Do you know? Aurora continued softly, that when my mother died, I wasn't allowed to speak at her memorial because my father said, business women were not built for sentiment. Yasmina tilted her head. That wasn't something she expected. I started building my company that year. Every late hour, every harsh decision, it was mortar. For a while, so no one could tell me what I couldn't say. Again. She paused. I am not here to steal your house, Madame Yasmina. I am here because I never had one. Not the kind built on stories, colors, music. She finally reached for her tea. And for the first time, I want to help protect something I cannot build. Silence stretched. Then Yasmina spoke, but this time her voice shifted not hard, but not yielding either. You say this to me in English, in words that roll like coins off an American tongue. But what language does your soul speak, Miss Layton? Aurora blinked. Then slowly she answered, not in Arabic, not in French, but in memory. When your granddaughter poured this tea, she said, I didn't just see hospitality. I saw ritual, respect, a small act that says, you are seen. My mother never poured me tea, but I've spent my life searching for that feeling. Yasmina's eyes shimmered just once. She looked down and sipped, a signal. Aurora followed. The tea was hot, floral, earthy, like the moment deserved. Yasmina set her cup down gently. You do not speak our tongue, but your heart. It speaks the right tenses. Aurora let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. There is something else, Yasmina added, her gaze narrowing slightly. What is it? Your janitor, Graham Ellis. Aurora straightened. Yasmina smiled knowingly. You are not the only one who has forgotten how to let something in. Aurora's eyes flickered. Yasmina nodded slowly, folding her hands in her lap. He speaks like an old book, one whose pages were once torn but stitched, back together by hand. There is sorrow there, but also great beauty. Aurora smiled. Yes, he's complicated. No, Yasmina corrected. He is simple. The world just stopped teaching people how to read that kind of man. There was a pause. Then Yasmina stood slow, deliberate. The jasmine behind her swayed like a bowing curtain. I will not sell Dar Allen, she said. At least not today. Aurora nodded, accepting. But I will send my daughter here, Yasmina added, to learn, not from textbooks or contracts, from the children who draw words in the sand, from the janitor who speaks, poetry between mops. Aurora's breath caught. It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no. It was better. Thank you, she whispered. Yasmina turned to go, then stopped at the archway. You came here alone, Miss Layton, without armor. I did. That is the only way to be invited in. And with that, the matriarch disappeared into the corridor's shadows, silk trailing behind her like a signature on wind. That night, back at the Riyadh, Graham found Aurora sitting on the rooftop terrace. She was barefoot again. He smiled. You're making a habit of that. It's the only way I know the earth is still real. He pulled up a chair. She didn't say yes, Aurora said. Graham sipped his coffee, but she didn't say no. Aurora turned to him. Why do I feel like I just passed a test I didn't study for? Because you stopped trying to impress and started trying to understand. She looked at him for a long moment. You know, she said, back in New York, people say I never cry, that I'm too sharp, too polished. Graham smiled. Polish hides the grain, but it doesn't remove it. She leaned back, looking up at the stars. I don't want to be remembered for numbers on a screen. You won't, he said. Then what will I be remembered for? He turned to her, quiet, certain for pouring tea and meaning it. The gate creaked softly behind them as Graham pushed it open. Dar al-Fan wasn't just a school. It was a sanctuary. And today, it didn't look like a place of power or politics. It looked like a storybook garden left ajar, stone pathways curved, between flowering hedges and mosaic-tiled fountains. The sun laid gold on every surface. Children's laughter floated in the air, not loud, just enough to remind the soul it still believed in joy. Amamira stood frozen at the entrance. Her tiny fingers gripped the hem of her father's shirt, eyes wide. Not afraid, just absorbing. She doesn't like surprises, Graham said quietly to Aurora, who stood beside them. Even the beautiful kind. Aurora knelt down beside the little girl. No rush, she whispered. Take all the time you need, Amir. The world can wait. Amira didn't answer, but she didn't pull away either. A quiet victory. They wandered deeper into the courtyard. Under the shade of olive trees, a small group of students, children from both local and international backgrounds, were sketching calligraphy on parchment. An elderly artist, his hands ink-stained and steady, guided their strokes without a single word. Just nods, just presence. Graham watched. Amamira's gaze locked onto them. She always notices hands first, he murmured, not faces. Hands tell stories more quietly. A boy noticed her, maybe 9 or 10. He smiled, held up his paper, a swirl of Arabic script that read, Near. Noor Graham said softly, It means light. Amira blinked. Then silently she took a step forward. The boy slid over to give her space on the mat. Graham and Aurora stayed back, watching from the archway. She doesn't even have to speak, Aurora whispered. She's already fluent in what matters. A few moments later, the artist handed Amira a reed stick dipped in diluted pigment. She didn't write. She walked to the far edge of the courtyard, where a patch of warm dirt lay undisturbed, and with careful, hesitant movements, Amamir knelt and began to trace letters in the earth with the tip of the stick. Her first stroke wavered. The second was more certain. 3 curves, 1 breathless pause, 1 long exhale. Ha-ha, be Graham's breath caught in his throat. Aurora stepped closer. What does it say? He swallowed emotion, gripping his voice. Hub, meaning Graham, looked at her. Love. Aurora didn't respond. She couldn't because in that moment, a woman of power who had spoken in markets and mergers found herself utterly wordless. Across the courtyard, Madame Yasmina appeared in her flowing white robes, hands clasped behind her back. She walked straight toward the girl, kneeling in the dust. Amira didn't notice. She was still tracing, brushing, her fingers gently over the word as if to bless it. Yasmina stood over her, silent, still. Then she lowered herself slowly to the girl's level knees, creaking but dignified. She didn't speak. She simply took her own finger, dipped it lightly in the earth, and added a dot beneath the B. A single grain of sand moved, but it changed. Everything. Amamira looked up. Yasmina smiled. Perfect, she whispered in Arabic. A perfect word from a perfect voice. Graham walked forward, emotion in every step. She doesn't speak often, he said softly. Yasmina nodded. She does not need to. She writes with light. The courtyard was silent now. The other children watched with reverence. One girl began to hum a lullaby in a dialect Graham hadn't heard since his wife passed. Amira looked up at her father. Then, as if something inside, her realigned, she stood and gently took Aurora's hand. It startled Aurora, who had never been touched without permission or agenda. Amira tilted her head, eyes clear. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice soft but sure. Aurora knelt beside her, overwhelmed. For what? Sweetheart, Amira reached down, tapped the earth, then whispered, "For seeing me." The words didn't echo. They embedded. Yasmina turned to Graham. "Mr. Ellis," she said, with the regal warmth of someone deciding the course of legacy, "your daughter carries the spirit of this place." "You too," she straightened. "I will sell Dar Allen, but not to be rebranded, not to be buried in policy. Only if you promise to let this courtyard speak its own language." Graham met her eyes. "Not only will I protect its voice," he said, "I will let it teach mine how to be quiet again." Yasmina nodded. "And what of the others?" she asked. "The children who do not yet know they belong in a place like this?" Graham glanced at Amir. "I'll build them a door," he said with a sign that doesn't need translation. Yasmina turned to Aurora. "And you, businesswoman of iron and silk?" Aurora didn't flinch. "I'll fund it, and I won't name it after myself." Yasmina raised a brow. "Then who?" Aurora looked at Graham. He didn't answer, but the way he squeezed his daughter's hand said everything. Later that evening, Aurora sat beside Graham on the edge of the courtyard, feet bare in the cool grass. Lanterns flickered above them. Children chased fireflies. Amira slept beside them, her head in Graham's lap. Aurora spoke into the quiet. "I used to think legacy was something you wrote on buildings, and now she looked at a mirror. Now I think it's what you plant in a child who thinks no one sees her." Graham brushed a strand of hair from his daughter's forehead. "Funny," he said, voice low. "For a woman who built walls, you've got a strange gift for opening doors." Aura smiled soft and unscripted. "I think I just needed someone to stop knocking and start listening." He turned to her, and for a second too long, neither of them spoke because sometimes the most powerful conversations don't need words at all. Aurora stood in the hallway outside the main conference room at Darren, her reflection fractured across the mosaic glass. Behind the doors, contractors and cultural consultants were assembling the next phase plans logistics press releases. She should have been in there. It was her signature on the documents, but her thoughts were somewhere else, or rather with someone else. She turned heels, clicking softly against the stone, and made her way through the east courtyard. Past the olive trees, past the etched marble pillars, until she reached the open-air studio where Graham stood alone, sleeves rolled, brushing dust from a row of wooden benches. "You don't stop moving," she said. He looked up with a faint smile. "Years of cleaning places that emptied out before I ever arrived." Movement makes the silence less heavy. Aurora stepped closer. The air between them held a strange tension, familiar, but not uncomfortable. "I have something for you," she said, reaching into her portfolio and pulling out a slim document. She handed it to him. "I want you to lead our new multicultural communications division. Full autonomy. Build it the way you see fit." Graham didn't take it. Instead, he studied her. "You don't give gifts like that lightly," he said. "It's not a gift," Aurora replied, voice steady. "It's recognition. You've done more in a week than my team has in a year. You've earned it." Graham glanced down at the document. His name was typed cleanly at the top. Graham Ellis, Executive Director, Cultural Integration and Education Initiatives. "I don't want a title," he said quietly. Aurora blinked. "You don't want Graham. This isn't just a ceremonial. It comes with authority, with funding, with voice. This would give you I don't want a salary either." Her jaw tightened. "This isn't some noble refusal. This is stubbornness." "No," he said gently. This is clarity. He stepped closer, folding the document, but not returning it. I've spent years cleaning things people walked away from without ever looking back. I know what abandonment feels like in buildings and people in systems. If I'm going to help build something now, it has to be from the ground. It has to matter. He paused. I don't want to be hired. I want to be invested. Aurora frowned. What are you saying? Graham's voice was steady, clear. I want a partnership. Not in name, in risk. I'll take a percentage, not a paycheck. If I fail, you owe me nothing. But if we build something real, if this center becomes what it can become, I want to know I didn't just rent my soul to your vision. I want to know I built mine beside it. Aurora stared at him. It wasn't the words that floored her. It was how much they didn't feel like a negotiation. They felt like a vow. Graham, she said, breath-catching, that's not how the world works. He stepped closer still. Then maybe it's time the world changed, or at least the corner we're standing in. She looked away, heart pounding. No man had ever stood in front of her without flinching at her ambition. No man had ever offered her anything without first measuring how it benefited him. But Graham, he wasn't asking for status. He was asking for meaning. You really think we can build something that lasts? She asked. He looked toward the garden where Amir was playing near a fountain with a group of children giggling softly. I think we already have, he said. Aurora followed his gaze, and for the first time in years, she saw something that wasn't on a balance sheet. She saw legacy not as a monument, but as motion, as connection, as kindness passed down like heirlooms. She turned back to him. You do realize, she said softly, that if you're my partner now, I don't get to boss you around anymore. Graham chuckled. I was never very good at being bossed, even by the best. She smiled. I'm not the best. He met her eyes. You're getting there. They stood in silence, the kind that wrapped around two people like a warm coat. Then, without ceremony, Aurora extended her hand. Graham looked at it, then passed it. Instead of shaking it, he placed the contract down on the bench between them and pulled out a folded sheet of paper from his own back pocket. Aurora raised a brow. What's that, a proposal? He said. Mine? She unfolded it. No corporate letterhead, no legal jargon, just hand-drawn sketches of a new wing on the Darlfan campus. Classrooms for speech therapy, multilingual story rooms, sensory gardens for children like Amamira, notes scribbled in both English and Arabic. At the bottom, one simple line, name of center, the Liana House, in memory of Liana Ellis. She taught us that language begins with love. Aurora's voice cracked. Your wife. He nodded once. She used to say, the hardest thing about losing your voice is thinking no one misses it. She looked up at him. Then let's make sure every child who walks in here knows theirs will be heard. A beat partner? She added. Graham smiled. That word sounds a lot better coming from you than from a contract. From the nearby courtyard, Amamira ran up with a handmade flower crown in her tiny hands. For you, she said, placing it gently on Aurora's head. Aurora laughed an unguarded, unpracticed laugh. Graham looked at her. Looks like you've just been crowned Queen of the Quiet Revolution. Aurora raised her chin with mock regality. Long. May I reign? She said. But her smile faded into something softer as she met his eyes. Graham. Yes, I think this might be the most important deal I've ever made. He looked down at his daughter, then back at the woman who had once laughed, at his resume. Then let's make it the most beautiful one, too. The desert didn't whisper. It sang, not with words, but with memory. Wind carving lines into the earth the way time carved stories into people. Graham stood at the edge of the open dunes just outside the city. Beyond the silence, the Dar al-Fan Center shimmered in the golden light, like an oasis of intent. Beside him, Amamir crouched low, her fingers tracing letters into the sand. Arabic letters. Aurora watched from a few paces behind, phone in hand, filming quietly. She taught herself that she asked. "No," Graham replied, soft pride in his voice. "My wife taught me. I taught Amir. But the meanings, she finds those on her own." Aurora looked down at the squiggles now forming into curves and dots. "What's she writing?" He smiled. "She wrote her name. And yours." Aurora blinked. "She knows how to spell my name. She doesn't spell it. She feels it." Amamira looked up just then, her tiny fingers brushing away the letters as quickly as she'd written them. "Too windy," she murmured. Aurora knelt beside her. "Some things are worth writing twice," Graham's voice came low, "or building from scratch." The wind picked up again, carrying not just sand, but the scent of old wood jasmine and sun-heated stone, the type of smell that only came from cities older than nations. "I got a call this morning," Aurora said, standing again, brushing sand from her pantsuit. "From the Ministry of Culture. They're giving us full accreditation status. International, press ambassadorial partnerships. It's big." Graham gave a soft nod, not surprised. "You don't look excited," she teased. "I am. I'm just grounded," she smirked. "You sound like a tree." "I am a tree," he said. The janitor, who stayed rooted long enough to matter. Aurora walked with him toward the nearby tent where a small delegation of elders had gathered. Among them was Illa, the elderly woman from the restaurant, the one who had started all this by getting lost in a moment of memory and language. When Illa saw them approach, she stood. She was dressed in cream linen robes, a sapphire scarf framing her aged but radiant face. Around her neck was a necklace bearing a single gold calligraphy charm, the word for home. "My heart is full," she said in Arabic. Graham replied in kind, his accent imperfect but respectful. Aurora followed with a greeting of her own, halting but sincere. Ila's eyes sparkled. "Even your stumbles show love," she said. "That's how we know you belong." They sat together under the shade. Mint tea was poured, small dates passed from hand to hand, but no one opened a folder. There were no laptops, no contracts, only people. Illa leaned forward. "In our culture," she said, "you don't bind souls with signatures. You bind them with sand." Aurora furrowed her brow. "I don't understand." Illa reached to the center of the circle and poured a small pile of sand from a pouch. Then, with one elegant finger, she began to draw. "This is how we made peace in our tribes. One elder writes a truth. The other responds, not to win, not to negotiate, but to witness." Graham's voice was quiet. "You mean like a conversation?" Illa nodded. "Exactly. But with hands, with earth, and with the knowledge that the wind will erase it. So you must hold it in your heart, not in ink." Aurora sat back, moved in a way she couldn't explain. Illa motioned to Graham. "Draw your truth." He hesitated, then stepped forward and wrote a word in Arabic, salam, peace. Then he added a second word, yatim, orphan. Illa nodded with deep understanding. Aurora stepped forward next to heart pounding. She didn't speak the language, but she remembered something Graham had taught her. She knelt and wrote one word, bait, home. The elders murmured in approval. Then one of them, a man with eyes like desert glass, added a final word, Aila, family. The wind lifted just as the last stroke was made, blurring the edges, but the meaning stayed. They didn't need signatures. They had just sealed a legacy. Back at the center, Amamira was leading a group of children through a gallery of sound and interactive room where each tile glowed with a different language. Japanese lullabies, Nigerian proverbs, Russian poems, Syrian wedding songs, a mosaic of cultures, a garden of voices, and in the corner, a plaque. The Liana house where every silence becomes a story. Aurora stood beside Graham, watching the children dance. "I was wrong," she said suddenly. He glanced at her. "About what? About leadership? About healing? About how long it takes to rebuild?" He said nothing but turned to her fully. Aurora continued, voice softer. "I used to think rebuilding meant efficiency. New cement, new tools, new hires. But it's not that, is it?" "No," he replied. "It's remembering the foundation and deciding. It's still worth standing on." She touched the edge of the plaque. "This started with a lost grandmother," she whispered. Graham nodded, and a little girl who whispered in Arabic. They stood in silence, surrounded by joy, by history, by hope, until Amir ran to them breathless with excitement. "Daddy, look! She sings like Mommy used to." Graham bent down, eyes glistening. "Who does a mirror?" Pointed to a girl across the room. She was humming a song in Farsi, a soft rocking tune. Graham's voice cracked. "That's Liana's lullaby." Aurora blinked, startled. Amamira nodded. "I remember. From the music box. From the nights Mommy kissed my hair." Aurora looked at Graham, stunned. "You never told me she was from Iran." "She wasn't," he said. But her soul always sang in Farsi. They stood there, the three of them listening, not to the music, but to the message. That love outlives language. That memory is a kind of song. That healing is a kind of home, and that sometimes the most powerful contract isn't written in ink or on paper or even in sand. It's written in hearts. The sun poured golden light across the courtyard of Dar Alan, painting the marble tiles in warmth, casting soft halos around the laughter of children. Marrakesh was alive with color that morning. The courtyard, once quiet and enclosed, now breathed with the sounds of life, multilingual chatter, tiny feet on stone, the echo of a tambourine someone had brought for rhythm practice. Banners waved gently overhead, printed in Arabic, English, French, and Braille. At the center of it all stood a little girl in a white cotton dress, barefoot curls, wild in the breeze. Amira. She wasn't hiding behind Graham's pant leg. She wasn't. Clutching her beads in a panic. She stood beneath the blooming almond tree in the courtyard, hand in hand with a woman in a blue silk pantsuit and a man with rough, calloused hands, who once held nothing but a mop, and now he held a future. A small podium had been set near the garden arch. An etched bronze plaque had just been unveiled on the sandstone wall behind it. The Layla Ellis Center for Multilingual Healing, a place where silence finds its voice. Graham had to close his eyes for a moment when he saw it. Ila's name, not just remembered, rooted. Aurora squeezed his arm. "You okay?" she asked softly. Graham looked at her, his eyes misted but smiling. "No," he whispered, "I'm better than okay." The ceremony began, without fanfare. No investors, no red carpet, just people who'd been silenced and now heard. Yasmina, draped in her olive green abaya and pearls, stepped forward and addressed the crowd in Arabic, then French, then with Graham by her side, English. "Today we do not sign contracts with pens," she said, her voice calm and regal. "We sign with trust. We build with heart. We remember those who could not speak and those who dared to listen." She turned to Aurora and placed a kiss gently on both her cheeks. "You kept your promise," Yasmina whispered. "I didn't promise to protect the past," Aurora replied. "I promised to let it breathe." There was a long silence before Yasmina nodded. "And it is alive again." The children gathered under the archway now, refugees from Sudan, Lebanon, Syria, Haiti, foster kids from Detroit and Brooklyn. all different tongues, all one song. Amamira stepped forward without being prompted. She looked up at Aurora, her eyes steady and soft, and then she said clearly in a voice just above the hush of the wind, "Thank you, Mama." The courtyard froze. Aurora's lips parted. Her eyes filled instantly. She crouched slowly, gently, bringing her hands to Amamira's face. Graham didn't move. He couldn't, not because he didn't want to, because everything in him had stopped at that moment, like the whole world was holding its breath. Aurora blinked down at the little girl who had barely spoken a word to anyone. "Did you just call me?" Amira nodded, clutching her finger. "You helped Daddy fix the words." Tears rolled freely down Aurora's cheeks now. She laughed and cried all at once, something primal and cleansing rising in her. "I didn't fix anything, sweetheart," she whispered. "You were always whole. We just found the right key." Graham finally stepped beside them, placing a hand on both their shoulders. His voice was low, reverent. She said her first full sentence 3 years ago. He said it was in a dream. She whispered it in Arabic, and when I asked her the next morning, she couldn't remember it. He looked at Aurora, then Amir. But maybe that sentence was waiting for this moment. Aurora rose and wiped her face. "You didn't just raise a daughter, Graham. You taught the world to listen differently." He chuckled softly. "All I ever did was mop the floor until the noise calmed down." Aurora smiled. "And I built walls so tall I couldn't hear anyone knocking." They looked at each other, truly not as janitor and CEO, not as single father and orphan to AYS, but as two people who had stopped running from their own silence. Graham turned to her, his voice suddenly lower just for her. "You know, I used to think kindness was invisible," he said, "but today it's standing in front of me in a blue suit, with tears on her cheek and a heart bigger than any empire." Aurora blinked hard. "I never thought I'd build anything that mattered without a decimal point attached." "Well," Graham said, taking her hand slowly, "maybe we just rewrote the valuation." Aurora's smile trembled. "And what do you think we're worth?" He leaned in. "More than gold," he whispered, "but less than Amamira's first mama." She laughed through her tears. "Fair." Music began in the courtyard, and you did a violin and a small wooden drum played by a boy from Fez. And as the sun began its descent across the walls of Dar Allen, Graham, Aurora, and Amamira walked through the garden hand in hand. They passed children whispering in Swahili, Pashto, Spanish, and Mandarin, and no one tried to translate them because in that garden, understanding didn't start with words. It started with listening. It started with love, and sometimes it started with a janitor who stopped mopping long enough to answer back. Sometimes the greatest miracles begin not with a grand gesture, but with a simple word spoken in the right moment, and someone kind enough to hear it. If this story moved you even a little, if it reminded you of someone who once listened when no one else did, then tell us in the comments. Where are you watching from? We'd love to hear your voice, just like Amira finally found hers. If you believe the world needs more stories like this, stories about second chances, healing, and the quiet power of kindness, hit that subscribe button and join our growing family. Because here, every story starts in the shadows, but always finds its way to the stars. Thank you for watching, and thank you for listening.